I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
This is our 48th episode. And John, we've been doing this for a year. And we warned and we worried and we argued and we tried to make it clear to everyone that Trump not only was wanting revenge, not only did he wanted to dismantle the government, that he was going to sink NATO. We said all these things, but as psychologists, we were also talking about his mental illness. That's his severe narcissistic personality disorder. That's also called malignant narcissism, which accounts for his pathological lying, his pleasure in destroying things, his lack of genuine relationships with people. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we were worrying about early signs of dementia in him, his inability to finish sentences, his disorganized speech. And we kept trying to get people to pay attention, and eventually kind of they did. But then he was elected, and suddenly the world saw him as just another president. But it's been almost 90 days, and he has wreaked more havoc on our systems, on our government, on our citizens, on the economy of the world, and our institutions of higher learning. It's just been a wrecking ball. And here we are trying to make sense of it from a psychological point of view. Right, John?
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is the moment we've been worried about. I mean, I entitled the show Constitutional Crisis Now. Originally, I thought Apocalypse Now, but I thought that might be a little dramatic. But this really is the constitutional crisis that everyone has been worrying about and warning about. Now people are saying it's here. And we're going to hear from some commentators who know a lot more about the law than you and I do, who are going to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about what's happening. You know, we all know that the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of this innocent man, you know, who'd been sent to an El Salvadorian, snatched off a Maryland street where I live, and dumped into the black hole of El Salvador. And so the Supreme Court told them to get him back. You know, you talked about his character pathology. One of the things about his character pathology is that he takes pleasure in flouting the law. You know, remember I introduced the term a few weeks ago, fuckery, you know, as a technical term. They're just fucking with the system. They're always like manipulating it or faking it or, you know, defrauding it but they're always working it in some way. So what he's doing is blatantly flouting the Supreme Court, but in this way that isn't technically flouting it but it's a wink, wink, nod, so that everybody knows we just found some language to use, or we just found some way to play act that we're not actually not obeying the Supreme Court. It sort of reminds me of, and you know, you and I grew up in New York City. Well, so did Trump. Okay, if you walked around the streets of New York, there's always some guy with a table, right, playing three-card Monte. Right, three-card Monte is where you try to find the queen, and it seems obvious where it is, but he's moving the cards around, and then you bet, and then you're always wrong because he's, you know, better at it than you are. That's what Trump is doing with this guy, right? So, but it's so obvious, right? It's such an obvious ploy. It's such an obvious trick or scam. So here they are in the Oval Office, right? So here we have the heads of state of America. Just to set this up for people who didn't see this, and the president of El Salvador, right? Presumably between the two men sitting there in the Oval Office, they can negotiate the release of one innocent man, right? We've negotiated all kinds of releases of like spies from China and Russia, but here they are sitting literally next to each other, and they are explaining why it's impossible for them to bring him back.
And exactly, but I just want to set this up a little bit more carefully. Okay, so this new head of El Salvador, who calls himself a dictator, imposed order on a completely disorganized society where there was no law. But one of the things he did was to build one of the worst prisons known to man right now. It's so brutal that it's really not a prison. It's a place where you put people who will eventually die. And Trump didn't just put this one guy by mistake. He sent hundreds there. It was a photo op for the Department of Homeland Security. Republicans went down there to be filmed in front of it.
Amazing.
Okay. It turns out there were many, many people who were put in there who had no criminal record, who were snatched off the street by ICE agents wearing black masks like Nazis. And so that's the setting, right? So finally, with one case, they're saying, bring this guy back. And then another judge is also saying, those planes took off for El Salvador and they didn't come back when I told them to. So that's also right. Working its way through the courts. So that's setting it up. So the president of El Salvador, who Trump is paying to take care of these prisoners, and is also paying him to build 5 more facilities there.
Yep.
That came out today.
Yes.
And then in the White House, of course, Trump likes to let reporters in who he then, denigrates. And they come in and they ask questions. And John's 3-card Monte is right there. Both guys, I don't know. Can you get him back? I don't know. But you can get him back. I can't. Yeah. That's what we're looking at, right?
Well, instead of looking for the queen, we're looking for an innocent man who's been sent to hell.
Can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to have suggested that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, could I smuggle him into the United States, or whether I do it? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So you could release him inside El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm not releasing. We're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. We just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
They'd love to have a criminal, released into our
country. There's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people.
Right. He's not a criminal. He's not a terrorist. And obviously, he could return him to the country. But while he's talking, Trump was smirking.
Exactly.
He was smirking, right? Well, I can't release a terrorist. And he's going, yeah, there you go. Like, we tricked you. We found a workaround. Ha, ha, ha.
And he got to accuse the press of wanting terrorists to be released back in the country. So it's such bullshit, and it's so terrible that this is happening in front of the world. What message is this sending?
That's right.
That we can't be trusted at all, and we can't.
And of course, we know everyone in his cabinet is an enabler. Let's see how little Marco explains why the courts have no business weighing in on this.
I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
President Trump.
Why do you keep asking this question? Why can't you just be happy that we're taking care of the terrorists?
And Caitlin Collins, who's an excellent reporter, was saying, you said this on the airplane. How does it on Air Force One? How does this stand up with this? She was asking a completely pertinent question. There was nothing rude about it. But listen, he's acting like a dictator. This is what dictators do.
This is what dictators do.
And Marco Rubio is such a spineless little. I mean, I just can't believe
he's a toady. He really is like a toad, right? He's just a little look your ass, right? He's just a toady.
It was just a terrible response and
also,
utterly irrelevant.
But also, this is what I mean about the fuckery, okay? Which is now we're going to make this a foreign policy issue. You see, this is a foreign policy issue. Well, that's outside the purview of the courts. This is a foreign policy issue. No, it's not. It's not a foreign policy issue, but that's the way they manipulate. That's the 3-card Monty again. Okay.
Right.
No, this isn't a legal issue of our of our depriving someone of their liberty and throwing them down in a pit. No, this is a foreign policy issue.
It's depriving someone of his due process, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And it doesn't just apply to citizens. It applies to anyone who's here. And by the way, as spineless Marco was just saying, he was granted asylum in this country because he knew he would be killed if he was returned to El Salvador. That was the conditions of his being accepted. And Marco Rubio knows that. And he just
he wasn't here illegally. He wasn't here illegally. He's not a terrorist.
He was here under asylum, not to be returned to El Salvador. And
he was here to be protected from the terrorists.
I believe, and I'm afraid that he's dead. And that's one reason why they're saying they can't bring him back, is because he's not alive anymore. And the Trump administration doesn't want to face the fact that he'll if this comes out, if I'm right, and I hope I'm not right, if I'm right and he's dead, it's going to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're afraid of that. So another reason for the 3-card Monty.
And to be continued. And one of the things that people are worried about is, first, this was kind of caught on a hot mic, and now he's starting to say it openly, that the next stage will be to start deporting citizens to the hell of the El Salvadorian prison. It's kind of like hell, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, right? So now they're going to start deporting citizens is his next move.
Yeah. Work will set you free.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too, and I'm all for it because we can do things with the president for less money and have great security. And we have a huge prison population. We have a huge number of prisons, and then we have the private prisons, and some are operated well, I guess, and some aren't. But he does a great job with that. We have others that we're negotiating with too.
So there you have it. He says they're not special. Well, they're special because they're American citizens and they have rights, due process rights, and also rights against cruel and unusual punishment.
Or being put into prisons off the country.
Right, where they'll die and never get out. Yeah.
It's chilling.
It's really chilling. And Harry, it's so chilling that this is why some very sober and respected legal experts are starting to say, we've crossed the Rubicon.
And I thought this day would never come, but I want to make sure people understand we are here. Everyone's, at least I have tried to say, we're not yet in that constitutional crisis. That is what is going on right now. I mean, this really is the Rubicon that I was hoping we would never ever get to, but that Judge Ludig correctly said this was going to happen, and it has. This is where we are. It is now going to be up to the Supreme Court to actually show some steel and backbone to find that this is in violation of their order and take as drastic steps as they can, and ideally, again, unanimously about what is happening here, or we really won't have a country left.
So, it's constitutional crisis now. Let's also hear what the New York Times had to say about this in an interesting video.
So for weeks now, we've been exploring a question: are we in a constitutional crisis? The answer is yes. But more important, that may be the wrong question. The right question to ask is, are we on the cusp of a fundamental and lasting and perhaps irrevocable transformation of American society and government? I've covered the courts for more than 2 decades and the Supreme Court for 17 years. I've never seen anything remotely like this. The sheer volume of executive orders signed by President Trump and the more than 100 challenges to them in the courts seem to be overwhelming the system. Presidential administrations through history, when a trial judge tells them to do something, they have typically done it, and when they disagree, they appeal. Here we have an administration that has 2 impulses. One is to avoid complying with a judicial order, and the other is to call for the impeachment of the judge in question. That gives rise to a very unusual statement from Chief Justice John Roberts. But in some ways, the Supreme Court actually laid the groundwork for some of the actions President Trump has been taking. In July, the Supreme Court gave President Trump substantial immunity from charges that he had tried to overturn the 2020 election. That's important, but it's nowhere near as important as some statements in the decision that laid out a vision of the presidency in which the president has unchecked power in many realms of his job. And that ruling certainly seems to have emboldened President Trump in his second term. He is asserting a kind of power over American society that we've not seen before in our history.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and there's another aspect of how they're putting pressure on judges. He talked about their threatening to impeach judges who make rulings that they don't like. But, in this environment of stochastic terrorism, for those people who don't know what that term means, stochastic terrorism is when there's a ideology floating around the ether that inspires certain individuals to take it into their own hands to commit terrorist acts. So maybe there's an anti-Semitism floating around in a political movement, but one crazy guy, he's not with a group, but he's influenced by the group to take an individual action, like attacking a synagogue or something like that. Well, some people are taking it upon themselves to intimidate these judges. And the woman who is going to be speaking to Nicole Wallace, I believe, on this tape, she herself was attacked and her son was killed. Was he killed or injured? Actually, I believe he was actually
killed some years earlier.
Yeah. But it was an attack on her.
He wasn't
killed. It was
killed.
a politically motivated attack, though, wasn't it? As I recall. Yeah, that it was in response to her rulings that the attack took place. I probably should have researched this a little better, but that's what I recall. That it was a hate crime against her for her judicial decisions, and here she is now on TV saying that people are ordering pizzas and sending them to judges' houses, right, to tell we know where you live, and some of them are being signed in her son's name.
About pizzas being delivered to various judges. These pizzas were being delivered to judges' homes, and so that first line of intimidation is, we know where you live. Then it escalated, and it escalated to pizzas being delivered to judges' children's homes. And that was an escalation of these acts of intimidation. Well, just this week, I was contacted by a judge, and I was told that the second pizza that arrived at this judge's house, he had already received one before, the second pizza that arrived at this judge's house was sent by my son, Daniel Andrew. The name that they used on the pizza was Daniel Andrew, my baby boy, who we lost on July 19, 2020. And if it would have stopped there, it would have been bad enough, but it's not stopping, Nicole. Just last night, another pizza. There's 4 now. 4 pizzas that are being sent to judges as threats. And who's the sender? Daniel Andrew. Let me tell you why this is significant. You send a pizza to a judge's house, that's the message, I know where you live. You send a pizza to a judge's child's house, I know where your child lives. But now you're sending pizzas to a judge and their child with Daniel Andrew as the sender, and that says you want to end up like Judge Salas's child. You want to end up like Judge Salas. These escalating threats are a problem, and that's why I'm here today. I just found this out Tuesday night, and I found out the 4th pizza was attempted to be delivered yesterday at 7:47. And Mark and I cannot continue to sit back and not talk about accountability at this point. I've talked to you about this being a bonfire that has been burning for some time. Well, I feel now that this administration, that members of Congress are throwing accelerants on this bonfire, and it is now burning, soon to be out of control, and a wildfire is going to form.
So, these movements have always used political violence, and there's always been like a paramilitary or some unofficial group of people who bully, who terrorize, who scare people into submission. So now in this internet age, it's just ordering pizzas, but it's a death threat.
Yeah,
so wonderful. That's another. Yeah, no, it's very
wonderful.
Great.
She's so brave. She's so brave, and she's so clear.
And so clear. She really got the message right across. So all these things, of course, are putting pressure on our rule of law and are ways in which the Trump administration is trying to basically overpower, ignore, intimidate, any kind of fuckery to basically impede the rule of law in this country. So we talked about how they're not following the Supreme Court's order in the turn of returning this innocent man. There's other ways that they're defying court orders. There's just so many of them that we can't keep track of them all. It's what I call constitutional crisis as a way of life. So, for example, they kicked the AP out of the White House press pool, one of the oldest news organizations in the country, also one of the most neutral. I mean, AP literally has no point of view. They're literally just meant to be a wire service giving information. In any case, they sued, they won, and the judge ordered that AP be readmitted to the White House press pool. Let's see what happened. AP journalists held out of White House events despite judge's ruling. The Associated Press was not included in the in-town pool Monday, and its journalists were rebuffed when trying to cover an Oval Office meeting. They're just not doing it. They just didn't do it. And there's so many constitutional crises going on at once that we almost can't keep track of them all.
Well, Trump reportedly said that Nicole Wallace and Rachel Maddow should resign from MSNBC.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at the way that we're going to talk more about what's happening with these universities, but they're trying to take control of these institutions, right? That in order to purge all critical voices. So, of course, they would want to do that. And they might try to find a way to intimidate the corporate owners of MSNBC to see if they can make that happen. Another thing I just wanted to call people's attention to is They are dismantling regulation, all regulations virtually, at a breakneck speed. Inside Trump's plan to halt hundreds of regulations. At the Department of Health and Human Services, Trump administration officials want to reverse a regulation that has required nursing homes to have more medical staff on duty. At the Mine Safety and Health Administration, powerful lobbying groups have asked the administration to eliminate a rule to protect miners from inhaling the dust of crystal silica, a mineral that is used in concrete, smartphones, and cat litter, but that can be lethal in the lungs. And at the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates radio and television broadcasting and satellite communications, President's appointee published a seemingly exuberant notice asking for suggestions on which rules to get rid of, titled, all caps, delete, delete, delete. Many people don't realize how high the American quality of life is because of the competent and stable enforcement of regulations. And if that goes away, a lot of lives are at risk, said Steve Chikala, the co-director of the National Bureau of Economic Research's project on the economic analysis of regulation. This affects airplane safety, baby formula safety, the safety of meat and vegetables and packaged foods, the water that you drink, and how you get to work safely and whether you're safe in your workplace. So, and by the way, once again, they're violating the law, of course. Why not? It's not a big deal, but you're actually required to have like a public comment period before removing a regulation, right? So people have a chance to actually weigh in and think about what the implications of this might be. And by the way, the number of regulations that they're getting rid of, again, it's like the executive orders. They're flooding the zone, right? They're just getting rid of hundreds of them. So, we can't even follow any one regulation because they're getting rid of so many at once. But the speed really is part of it, because part of the American system of government is actually based on delay. It's part of the imbalances are actually like, well, it's got to go through a committee where a bunch of people are going to read it and bullshit about it and make changes, and then it's got to negotiate with these other people who are reading it and doing the same thing, and then this other group weighs in, and now this group wants to sue, so we're going to have to stop
the Senate. What was the famous line? The Senate is the
teacup.
So but you pour the tea into the
saucer.
plate, the saucer, so it cools off.
Yeah.
Slowing down is right. You're absolutely part of it, and they're just they're using an accelerant to get so much
accelerant.
done.
It's really, really a great word. So now we've come up to one of our favorite sections, the collaborators and resistors of the week. All right. So for the collaborators of the week, I want to point out a couple of judges. So, Harry, you would think that, if anyone had a shred of humanity, they wouldn't release ICE agents into elementary schools where they can terrify children, handcuff them, right, and drag them out of school in front of their friends, right? So in Colorado, the school system sued to have ICE agents kept out of their schools. But too bad, the judge rejects the Denver Public Schools' attempt to block Trump ICE guidance. U.S. District Court Judge Daniel D. Domenico said there is little practical difference. Really, there's little practical difference between the prior policy, the last iteration of which was issued in 2021 under former President Biden, and a pair of memos issued by the Trump administration in January. I don't know what the hell that means, but I'm sure that it's not true.
Well, I think what's important for us to note, though, is I disagree with this guy, Judge Domenico, who I think deserves our Flying Finger Fickle of Fate Award for the week.
And now it's time to give the Flying Fickle Finger of Fate Award.
But but we're not calling for his impeachment, and we're not calling him a traitor, and we're not undermining his position. No, because we don't know, John. We don't do that to judges. Judges are in a position to make decisions, and if we disagree with them, we can rail against the decisions. But what the other side is doing is threatening to take them down and take them out.
I'm not threatening anybody, but Harry, I'm going to have to disagree with you here, because why would Judge Domenico make such a inhumane and stupid decision. Oh, let's look at his Wikipedia page. Oops, appointed by Donald Trump. You see, Harry, I believe there's a difference between, well, I disagree with you. I think there's a difference between Trump. There may be a few good people on both sides. There may be some honest Trump judges, but I believe that the majority of Trump judges are psychopathic political operatives in black robes. And I don't give them any respect. I mean, are you going to give Aileen Cannon respect? Are we going to respect her position? She's a traitor. She's a collaborator. She's part of
the difference between you. What's the difference between them and you? If you're undermining institutions, it's the same thing, John.
I'm only undermining the corrupt people.
But you don't know that they're corrupt. You don't know he's corrupt just because he was appointed by Trump. That's just not. That's very low bar.
Looking at this decision, this is a corrupt decision in my view.
Decision.
One decision. Oh, wait, we're not done. Okay, is nothing sacred? That you might ask that, right? Is nothing sacred? These kids' schools being invaded? Well, actually, Harry, apparently, nothing is. ICE can conduct enforcement actions in places of worship, U.S. judge says. Ruling is a win for the Trump administration and a blow to religious groups, as evidence does not show worship houses as special targets. And can we see the picture of the judge? Would that be all right? There we go. Appointed by Donald Trump. Hey, maybe it's just a coincidence. Just saying.
I'm saying you don't protect institutions from Donald Trump and then attack them because there are people in those institutions appointed by him. It doesn't. You can't do both at the same time. To me, it's
I disagree. I disagree fundamentally because they've been appointed to destroy the institutions. They're saboteurs. They're double agents. Aileen Cannon. You want to defend the judicial providence of Aileen Cannon?
Okay, I guess you maybe when your side takes power, you can impeach them and punish them for their decisions. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. But we'll disagree.
Well,
let's keep going.
Okay. Anyway, let's move it. So those are the collaborators of the week. Boo. All right. Now let's talk about the resistors of the week. Harry, I think you should really talk about this because this is really your bailiwick.
So Harvard is being attacked by Trump, and he's threatening to take away billions of dollars in research. And after Columbia had really caved pretty quickly a few weeks ago, although they're kind of taking that back now, thankfully. This was the front page about this story. Harvard decision to resist Trump is, quote, of momentous significance, unquote. But a fight with the nation's oldest, richest, and most elite university is a battle that President Trump and his powerful aide, Stephen Miller, want to have. Harvard University is 140 years older than the United States, has an endowment greater than the GDP of nearly 100 countries, and has educated 8 American presidents. So if an institution was going to stand up to the Trump administration's war on academia, Harvard would be at the top of the list. Harvard did that forcefully on Monday in a way that injected energy into other universities across the country, fearful of the president's wrath, rejecting the Trump administration's demands on hiring, admissions, and curriculum. Some commentators went so far as to say that Harvard's decision would empower law firms, the courts, the media, and other targets of the White House to push back as well. This is of momentous significance, said J. Michael Ludwig, a prominent former federal appeals court judge revered by many conservatives. This should be the turning point in the Americans' rampage against American institutions, unquote. Michael S. Roth, who is the president of Wesleyan University and a rare critic of the White House among university administrators, welcomed Harvard's decision. Quote, what happens when institutions overreach is that they change course when they meet resistance, he said. It's like when a bully is stopped in his tracks.
So hats off to Harvard.
No, it's fantastic. But the thing about you all might hear that and go, well, all right, so they're pushing back, and what was Trump really going to do to them anyway? I got a hold of the letter. It's in the public domain, and I highlighted some things I want you guys to hear. So there are 7 or 8 major points, but in one of them, the first one, governance and leadership reforms. This is the letter from Trump's administration.
Right.
By August 2025, Harvard must make meaningful governance reform and restructuring to make possible major change consistent with this letter, including fostering clear lines of authority and accountability. And I highlighted this, which includes reducing the power held by students and untenured faculty, reducing the power held by faculty, whether tenured or untenured, and administrators more committed to activism than scholarship. So they're deciding,
right,
whether administrators, faculty have the right to make decisions that distinguish scholarship from activism. Then merit-based hiring reform. They first begin by saying that the university must get rid of DEI and hire and not hire preferences based on race, color, religion, sex, etc. But then it includes this line: all existing and prospective faculty shall be reviewed for plagiarism, and Harvard's plagiarism policy consistently enforced. All hiring and related data shall be shared with the federal government and subjected to a comprehensive audit by the federal government during the period in which reforms are being implemented, which shall be at least until the end of 2028. Can you imagine? Unbelievable.
So what they're saying is prepare to be boarded, right? Right. This is a pirate takeover of the ship. We're going to control everything. We're going to decide who gets to stay, who doesn't get to stay, who gets hired, who doesn't get hired. We want to read the application of every person who applies for a job there, and we're going to put it through our own loyalty test. So I think one of the reasons that they did have to, aside from the fact that they really showed character in saying no when others had said yes, is this is an absolutely unmeetable set of demands, right?
Absolutely.
There's absolutely no way any independent academic institution could agree to these absolutely outrageous terms. Although maybe some state universities will be pressured into having to do this. We don't know.
Oh, but you see, the Big Ten state universities, Michigan State, I believe Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, are creating a consortium of schools to fight back this kind of blackmail and this blatant attempt to take over institutions of learning by the Trump administration. Whenever in history has an administration tried to take control of independent, financially endowed private institutions? Now, I get it. Harvard gets, billions of dollars for research, but who does that research benefit? It's the best cancer research in the world. It's the best neuroscience research in the world. It's responsible for so many discoveries and advances which we all benefit from, that the world benefits from.
Harry, they don't care about cancer. They are cancer. This is a cancer on our country and on our academic institutions. It's what every dictator does, right? They have to take control of the universities to teach the new Hitler youth what it is they're supposed to learn.
Well, and yet, and we're, I know our guest we're going to be getting to later has some thoughts about this kind of thing, but this is so clumsy. This was guaranteed to fail. What if they had found a way to be a little more insidious, just ask for certain things, holding back the money, so they could kind of bring Harvard under their control a bit. This is so blatant.
Well, they're
There's
always
no way Harvard
ham-fisted.
would ever say yes.
They're always ham-fisted.
So ham-fisted.
And since
Thank
we
goodness.
organized this show, just today, they announced that they're going to threaten to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. Now that'll probably be thrown out by a judge. But in other words, they're looking, again, I'm sorry, but I have to use the technical word, the fuckery. They're using any means necessary, any mode of attack, right? So even something as ridiculous as their tax-exempt status, which were, of course, the corrupt IRS director that they've put in. The new guy, I forget his name, but he felt they weren't aggressive enough going after Hunter Biden. That's their kind of guy, So yeah, I guess they'll do it, and then they'll litigate it. But this is the thing. They're going after the universities. They're going after the intelligentsia. They want to control the minds of the youth. That's what dictators do. Let's compare it to the Columbia letter. And Harry, I think there's something you wanted to point out.
Yeah. If we take a look at it, it talks about DEI stuff and holding student groups responsible for being anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. But at the end, what it says is, begin the process of placing the Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies Department under academic receivership for 5 years. The university must provide a full plan with date-certain deliverables by March 20th, 2025 deadline. Now that falls so far short of what they're saying to Harvard. Looking at every faculty member across the entire university.
Every department. Well, and that's the thing about extortion, right? That's what we've been saying about extortion. They never, the gangsters don't just take one bag of cash to protect the bakery. They actually start upping the price. So that was humiliating enough that Columbia agreed to those terrible terms. But the terms they offered Harvard were literally, I don't know, how many departments do they have at Harvard? 100? Well, then it was 100 times worse, because they're saying we should have control over every hiring decision in every department.
Hiring.
So this is the point. You give them an inch and they'll take a mile. But you know what? I'm excited. Columbia has taken inspiration from Harvard's resistance. We have a new president of Columbia. And Harry, maybe you could read about her reaction to the Harvard stance.
Columbia vows to reject any Trump deal that threatens its independence. By the way, it's referring exactly to that paragraph that I read. A message from the university's acting president said that talks with the Trump administration were continuing as the White House is seeking to place the school under judicial oversight. But on Monday, Ms. Shipman, who said that she read a strongly worded note from Harvard's president with great interest, quote unquote, appeared to adopt a new tone, the most robust sign of potential pushback from Columbia's leadership since the government's cancellation of federal funding to the university. Ms. Shipman wrote that Columbia would, quote, reject heavy-handed orchestration from the government that could potentially damage our institution and undermine useful reforms, unquote. She said that any agreement in which federal officials dictate, quote, what we teach, research, or who we hire, unquote, would be unacceptable.
All right, go Columbia. And they were inspired by Harvard's resistance. So that's what you like to see, right? One group or institution stands up and others are inspired to join.
And I have to say, my institution, Cornell, where I'm on faculty, and they were threatened with a $1 billion take back of funds, although it turns out it's not anything close to $1 billion. And they just haven't responded. They're just saying, where's the rush? And they're ghosting. They're ghosting. And I think that they will be part of an Ivy League group that will band together to fight against this really vicious attempt to seize control of universities, which they're not going to let happen.
Yeah. So the other resistors of the week that we wanted to focus on, because we've been criticizing Democratic politicians for not doing enough, but there are some who are doing a lot. And, the one who is actually hewing closest to the advice that our political commentators have been giving, right? People like Joe Walsh, who knows his politics, have been saying there should be a Democratic, even potential presidential nominee on the hustings right now. Not 2 years from now. Well, there actually is. There's an 88-year-old grumpy man named Bernie. And he's getting this incredible crowds all around the country. He's barnstorming the country. Let's look at just some of these things. Here he is, of all places, the youth. So that's inspiring. He's inspiring the young people. He's saying, don't just turn inward and listen to rock music, get involved. And they're responding to him. He is a populist.
And listen, he's also touring with AOC. And
touring with AOC.
Alex Ocasio-Cortez is fantastic on the stump.
It's great. It's great. It really is great. And here's just a couple of other examples of some of the crowds he's getting. Here's one in California. Look, you can just see it's a sea of people. Someone's doing sort of a panoramic. I was actually told that this is a county that has something like 65,000 people, and they counted 30,000 people in the crowd. And here he is, and of all places, Idaho. Look at how that stadium is packed. Remember we kept looking at crowd sizes during the election? Well, Trump never, his auditoriums always had like lots of empty spaces. This auditorium is packed. Maybe, Bernie and Bernie for president? I don't know. Will he be like 90 then? I don't know. It's a good thing AOC is going with him. I think he's trying to bring her along, but he's really doing the work that we're saying that people need to do.
The person who galvanizes resistance does not have to be the next Democratic nominee. They just have to be galvanizing every day.
But then he's always going to look grumpy and with those mittens, Remember those memes where people kept putting grumpy Bernie with his hands crossed with the mittens in all these unlikely places? That's a little internet humor there for those of us who don't really have lives. Okay, but another person who's standing up is my home senator of Chris Van Hollen. Now, don't remember, this guy was snatched off the streets of Maryland, right? So he's gone to El Salvador to try to free him.
If you listen to President Trump and the Trump administration, you would think that the U.S. courts have found that Mr. Abrego Garcia is part of MS-13, but in fact, they have not found that. In fact, recently, a U.S. federal court judge said that the Trump administration did not have evidence to support the claim that he had ever been part of MS-13. In fact, Mr. Abrego Garcia is legally in the United States. In fact, an immigration judge found years ago that it would put his life in danger if he was returned to El Salvador. And so he was given protective status and a work permit. And by the way, that was done during the last Trump administration, the last time President Trump was in office. And they never appealed that decision. So I want to emphasize that President Trump and our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and the Vice President of the United States are lying when they say that Abrego Garcia has been charged with a crime or is part of MS-13. That is a lie.
He's so great.
Good for him.
And he really and he talked to the vice president of El Salvador because the president was out of the country, of course. And it not only did the vice president refuse to let him meet with this man, he also admitted that no one from the Trump administration had asked for Mr. Rivera to be brought back.
Right. There you go. Well, Now that everybody's sufficiently depressed, I've got some more bad news. So you remember when, these conservatives like Elon Musk made such a cause célèbre out of free speech, which we knew was actually a Trojan horse for Russian speech. Okay. But of course, because everything in conservative world is opposite speak. I know you've been learning French there, Harry, going to school. But I think people are going to have to start learning opposite speak. It's going to have to become, because it's becoming the lingua franca, actually, of the American government, opposite speak. So free speech, more free speech means no free speech. Okay. For example, here's something scary. They're issuing now executive orders, not just even against specific law firms or organizations. No, now they're getting granular enough to issue executive orders against individuals by name for saying things Trump doesn't like.
There's a million news stories right now, and some need a couple of days to digest. Earlier this week, Donald Trump signed executive orders targeting 2 private citizens. I'm going to say that one more time. Donald Trump signed executive orders targeting private citizens. I told you about how Donald Trump has used his office to go after big media companies and big law firms, but now he's literally directing his attorney general to investigate 2 former employees who have said or done things he does not like. I feel like I'm going fucking insane. The 2 people he's targeting are Miles Taylor and Christopher Krebs. Miles Taylor was the author of an anonymous op-ed written in 2018 in which he identified himself as part of the resistance within the Trump administration, putting a check on some of Trump's worst impulses. But then there's Christopher Krebs. Chris Krebs is the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the agency in charge of securing our voting and elections systems. After Trump lost the 2020 election, the agency distributed a statement certifying that experts had concluded the 2020 election was the most secure in American history. Trump didn't like that. So Trump put out an executive order titled Eradicating Government Betrayal. Again, let me repeat that one more time. Eradicating Government Betrayal. The executive order directs the Attorney General to revoke their security clearances, and the security clearances of any organization associated with them, and it directs the Attorney General to investigate Chris Krebs' career as a government employee. Given how many big law firms have bent the knee to Donald Trump, it's an open question whether these guys can even find lawyers to represent them. These executive orders serve 2 purposes. Number 1, to get retribution against people that Donald Trump doesn't like personally. And number 2, to threaten any future whistleblowers or government employees from crossing Trump, even if it means doing their jobs. This is probably the most authoritarian action Trump has taken yet, and it won't end here. You want to know what you can do about it? Make your voice heard. Call your member of Congress. Show up at their town halls, and if they won't have one, donate to their opponent or the local opposing party in their district. Use your voice, because they're trying to take it away.
It is chilling, right? Well, look, I hope they don't ever get to us, but we're so far down on the list, Harry. I don't think we need to worry about that. But chilling, really far down, way far down, nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. The other thing they're doing is scouring the social media of students, especially foreign students, to see if they have the right kind of ideology to remain in this country.
Imagine if something you posted on social media years ago could get you deported. That's a reality now for about 1.5 million foreign students who are here in the U.S. legally. A new task force at the Department of Homeland Security is using data analytic tools to scour the social media histories of people on student visas. And our sources tell us they're looking for potential reasons to revoke their visas. DHS officials say they're considering what the department deems anti-Semitic activity on social media as grounds to revoke or deny immigration benefits. That could mean they could lose the ability to study in the United States, and they could be potentially deported. But critics say this could be compared to McCarthyism. The tools the DHS task force is using are run by Customs and Border Protection's National Targeting Center and National Vetting Center. Those tools were actually enhanced during the Biden administration, but former Biden officials say they were only looking for posts of people who might pose a violent threat. But the Trump administration seems to be taking a much wider view. Any potential red flags will be shared with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which in turn will ask ask the State Department if a student's visa should be revoked. If they say it should be revoked, the task force will inform ICE agents on local field offices to go out and arrest and then move to deport those students. Over the last month, nearly 300 international students have already had their visas revoked, according to media reports and universities that have reviewed their systems.
So, freedom of speech. You have the freedom to be deported if we don't like your speech. Never mind if you're, studying at Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, or, curing cancer.
Right. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. And they're starting to become more sophisticated. As you noticed in that thing, they were using AI to like scour the, the internet, blah, blah, blah. So of course it's allowing them to be much more efficient in their repression, right? So ironically, technology is now allowing the authoritarian state to monitor our every move in a way that actually wasn't possible before. One of the ways they're doing that is using AI to spy on federal workers.
Managers at 2 federal agencies have warned staffers that DOJ might be secretly monitoring their communications, including using software to track computer activity and possibly using artificial intelligence to scan for disloyalty or DEI buzzwords. That's according to new reporting from Crooked Media and The Guardian. They spoke to more than 24 federal employees who shared emails from agency officials and screen grabs.
Anxiety and fear are running rampant among federal employees, in part because some of them have been told that DOJ is monitoring their workplace, whether that be with artificial intelligence or just snooping
Told
on
by whom?
Their managers at these at least 2 agencies that they are being monitored secretly in meetings.
One of the things that the managers are warning employees about is they need to be careful with what they're talking about because they shouldn't criticize Trump or Elon Musk or Doge, and to be really cautious about what they're saying.
According to this new report, EPA managers told employees that DOJ was using AI to scan through agency communications to find any anti-Musk, anti-DOJ, as you just mentioned, or anti-Trump sentiments, adding that employees should be, quote, very careful about what they say in private messages and virtual meetings.
This is reporting by Matt here and also Joseph Gideon from The Guardian, and what they found was that federal workers are scared. They're nervous. They're losing sleep. They're not able to focus on what they're doing. They're worried about employees who have been fired. They're worried about being fired themselves. And in addition, they are very concerned about surveillance. We've heard stories of some people who have gotten white noise machines to turn on in their office. We've heard stories about people going into an office break room to turn on the faucet.
It's like out of a spy movie, like get in the shower so we can have a conversation.
It's like old school Cold War stuff.
Right.
Except this is not the KGB. This is the Trump administration.
I mean, think about how chilling that is.
And I just on a side note, I've read Matt Berg's stuff. He's a wonderful reporter. I didn't know he was 13. I mean, I am so old that these young reporters look like kids to me. I hats off to him, wonderful reporter. But it's a testament to what's still remaining that we can hear from Crooked Media and we can hear reports like this. At least,
I don't know about you. I mean, I'm in the Washington area, so I have a lot of federal employees or people who are on research grants or really have different connections to federal, and it's exactly what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. They're terrified and they're afraid to talk. They're afraid to talk among their colleagues. This is how authoritarian systems take over. If you're afraid, right, to even express a view against the government where you have to turn on the shower, or go outside. I mean, it is like spycraft stuff, only now we're all having to practice spycraft to protect ourselves from our own government, not because we're spies, because we're normal people who are being spied on.
Right. No, I hear you.
And by the way, just a little pet peeve of mine, they keep punishing the university saying, well, because we've got to root out the anti-Semitism, and here it's anti-Trumpism, anti-Muskism. Can I just speak on behalf of all Jews? Don't do us any favors. Stop helping us, because know you're anti-Semites. So stop adding insult to injury by telling us that you're crushing academia to protect us. You're not. Okay. So just stop. Stop. Just have to get that out. But, Harry, it's not just anti-Semitism we have to worry about. No. There's a lot of bad. There's anti-Christianism too.
Oh, let's hear it.
And I didn't know if you knew this, but anti-Christian sentiment is running wild at the State Department. Like, are you or have you ever been anti-Christian? And it's such a serious problem. It's so bad that the administration, the State Department, has encouraged all State Department employees to spy on each other and report any potentially anti-Christian bias. Like East Germany and the Stasi, they're starting to experiment with citizens spying on each other. Let's see that article. The Trump administration has ordered State Department employees to report on any instances of coworkers displaying, quote, anti-Christian bias as part of its efforts to implement a sweeping new executive order on supporting employees of Christian faith working in the federal government. Oh, yes, they need so much support. The department, according to a copy of an internal cable obtained by Politico, will work with an administration-wide task force to collect information, quote, involving anti-religious bias during the last presidential administration, and will collect examples of anti-Christian bias through anonymous employee report forms. The cable encourages State Department employees to report on one another through a tip form that can be anonymous. Quote, reports should be as detailed as possible, including names, dates, locations. For example, post or domestic office where the incident occurred, the cable reads. Some State Department officials reacted to the cable with shock and alarm. I can't believe there are any that didn't, saying that even if well-intentioned, it is based on the flawed premise that the department harbors anti-Christian bias to begin with, and warning it could create a culture of fear as the administration pushes employees to report on one another. It's very Handmaid's Tale-esque, said one State Department official who was granted anonymity because the individual was not allowed to speak openly, of course, about internal department affairs.
John, what do you have against the war on Christmas? Bill O'Reilly started alerting us to this terrible thing, and here they are trying to root out the war on Christmas.
And the Christmas warriors have infiltrated the State Department, and we will hunt them down and root them out. Don't you fear?
No, but John, of course you're right. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's not about anti-Christian. It's about control. Right.
Exactly.
It's about having a justification for spying on people and making them afraid. That's all it's about.
That's all it's about. And the other part, of course, is everybody needs to praise the dear leader. So some of you may have seen the cabinet meeting where everyone went around the table and started with a preamble about how wonderful Trump is before they got to, saying anything else. Well, we had that tape, but we had to cut a few things for the show. So we just decided to show one of the most egregious ones. Yes. A woman I truly despise, Pam Bondi.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really despise her.
We've had some great wins in the last few days that, you were overwhelmingly elected by the biggest majority. The U.S. Americans want you to be president because of your agenda, and the courts are ruling that you have the authority to determine how the money of this country will be spent. That's what the American citizens wanted, and that's what they're getting. An example of that Friday was the Department of Education, that you can determine how the money will be spent, no more DEI, and that impacts every agency across the board.
So that's actually not true, that the courts have said that he can spend the money any way he wants.
None of it's true. And he didn't win by the greatest majority. That's insane. You didn't even get over 50%.
The only way to survive in the Trump administration is to talk like you're insane. That's how you have to survive, right? To be the dear leader and to worship him, and it doesn't matter if what you're saying isn't true, as long as you're fluffing his ego. But that's not enough, Harry. It's not enough to tell the great leader how great he is. You also need to wear a pin with his image on it. This is real, folks. Trump is now commanding his cabinet and loyalists to wear a, quote, Trump golden bust pin instead of American flag pins. For those of you who are just listening, it's a golden picture of his head. Okay. And if we went back and showed you that cabinet meeting, a lot of the people are visibly wearing those Trump pins. So, Heil Trump.
Actually, John, can I just say something? That's really crazy.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I know it's it's authoritarian, but that's really crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Yeah. I don't. This wasn't in the article, but they also have to wear pajamas with Trump's pictures on it as well, because they should remember the dear leader at all times. So we were going to end there, but an article emerged about Elon Musk that just says so much about his psychopathology that we just had to add it at the end of the show. I call this Father of the Year. Elon Musk's wild plan to father, quote, a legion of kids by hitting women up on X revealed. Elon Musk isn't just building his empire by running tech businesses. He's also creating a, quote, legion of children. The tech mogul recruits potential mothers on X. It's like a sex slave ring. The tech mogul recruits potential mothers on X to fulfill his goal of combating the declining population, according to sources who spoke to the Wall Street Journal. One woman reportedly spoke of the harem drama with Musk's circle. The 53-year-old is known to have fathered 14 children by 4 separate mothers, including the musician Grimes. The true number of Musk's children could be even higher, sources told the Journal. It's actually a mystery. We actually don't know how many children he has. The Tesla billionaire is said to refer to his children as a legion, in a nod to the ancient Roman army. To reach legion level before the apocalypse, we'll need to use surrogates, Musk told St. Clair in a text message obtained by the Journal. So he's trying to create a legion of offspring by using X to recruit women as surrogate baby mamas to populate the world with his DNA. It's just incredibly grandiose and sick.
Are you going to tell the audience about Genghis Khan?
You have to tell them about Genghis Khan.
Please,
Genghis.
go for it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize this, but some crazy number like 1/15 of the people on planet Earth are descendants of Genghis Khan. He was the most reproductively successful individual on planet Earth. Apparently, as he raped and pillaged his way through Asia, he raped as well as pillaged his way through Asia and just produced so many offspring. But it's that kind of dictator grandiosity, right? To have a harem, right? To be the alpha male that has all the women to yourselves and spreads your superior, DNA to create your Roman leader. It's nuts and it's abusive. And apparently what he does with these women is he gives them all. I didn't read the rest of the article because we're running out of time, but he gives the women $50 million and has them sign an NDA. So he's got all these women hatching his babies anonymously, right? Because hey, 50 million, it's worth keeping your mouth shut because you got to raise your child now. So he's just Johnny Appleseed. Anyway, I just thought that was so nuts. I just wanted to bring that up.
It's like the Trump pins. It's just as crazy.
It's just as crazy.
Well, I'm so pleased to introduce our guest this week. You've seen her before. Her name is Laurie Winer. She's a journalist, a theater critic, and she's also an expert on the emergence of fascism in Germany in the 1930s, in particular, the emergence of Hitler. And when she's been on the show before, she has been eerily clairvoyant about what things might happen. And now they're happening. So we thought it was about time that we brought Laurie back on. And lo and behold, here she is.
Bonsoir. I'm so clairvoyant that I moved to France before the election. So I'm pretty clairvoyant.
And I left for 3 months on Inauguration Day.
Yeah. So yes, Laurie, we have to admit you were into fleeing before fleeing was cool.
That is right.
Now everybody's doing it.
Everybody will be doing it. I think
before you know it, everyone will be doing it. Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of people will be doing it.
Well, you know, you're not our first guest to flee, Jason Stanley, the Yale professor, who teaches about authoritarian regimes. He was actually on our show, and we said to him, we interviewed him, and I actually asked him the question. So, when will we know when it's time to flee? And I actually don't remember his answer. He gave a fairly nuanced and complicated answer, but he fled.
Yeah. And Timothy Snyder, right? Timothy Snyder left Yale.
Timothy Snyder, actually, they went together.
And now they're living in Canada.
Yep. He went to the University of Toronto. They moved the three of them together. So, but he said,
that's right. That's right.
He said there are a number of really factors you look at, right? And part of it is the deterioration of institutions. And part of what made him go was the Columbia settlement. You know, the feeling that, okay, the law firms are kneeling, now the universities are kneeling. And he said, as someone who knows, right, each domino, right, as they fall one after the other in a collapse of a democracy, he said, that's the domino. That's the one. When that domino goes, right, when the university bends a knee, that's the last domino for me. That's the signal to go.
So maybe Harvard holds out hope for, institutions coming together and not standing alone.
Absolutely.
In order to have some leverage, possibly.
And Laurie, what I've heard is that the Ivy League is actually getting together and pooling resources. Also, the Big Ten in the Midwest. So you're finally seeing these folks wake up. And I don't know if you heard that great line by David Brooks, which I keep quoting, which is that Trump isn't transactional; he's an extortionist. And when you give into an extortionist, the extortionist always wants more. And that's what we're seeing. And they're realizing it, thankfully.
Yes, I do have some. I see a few hopeful signs, which I'll get to, but I'm going to start with the really the bad stuff, because there were two things that happened in this past week that really resonated with my research into the Third Reich. That are things that may not be readily apparent to people who aren't just knee deep in this research, at this moment. So the first one, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about this anyway, was the incredible scene in the Oval Office when Trump hosted the president of El Salvador. Yeah. Okay, so everybody has seen it, I'm sure, but a reporter asked Trump about the return of Abrego Garcia, that poor man who's from Maryland. And Trump doesn't answer, but he has Pam Bondi answer for him. And she says, that's up to El Salvador. I mean, if they want to return him, that's not up to us. And then the reporter asked Bukele, the president of El Salvador, and he says, you're not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right? I mean, how can I return him to the United States? What, I smuggle him in, or what do I do? Of course I'm not going to do that. It's like, the question is preposterous. I don't have the power to return him to the United States. So that's all a direct quote. So no one in that room has the power to do anything, or seemingly has anything to do with the fact that the man is there. And so no one's responsible for what happened. obviously this is beyond chilling, but it reminded me of a line at the end of a Holocaust documentary called Night and Fog, which was made in 1955. It was a French filmmaker, Alain Resnais. And at the very end of that film, and it's a very interesting film because it's not so much a documentary as kind of a meditation on what happened. It's very interesting. At the end, the narrator says, I'm not responsible, says the capo. I'm not responsible, says the officer. I'm not responsible. Then who is responsible? Holocaust deniers always shift the blame. You know, I mean, some acts are so heinous that you don't want to believe that a human agency made it happen, and no one will take responsibility for it.
But Laura, can I just add one thing? Can I just one thing? Because that's a very deep existential analysis. This reminds me of something a little more primitive. Growing up in the streets of New York, there used to be these fast guys who would play 3-card Monte. I don't know if you remember that game where you try to find the queen and he's moving them around. And these people are so skilled at that. It's like, well, we can't get him because it's up to El Salvador. Well, El Salvador can't return him because that would be returning a terrorist. So wink, wink, nod, nod. You know, only here the prisoner is the queen, right? That we're shifting him around so that it's just a flim flam, you know, but it's a blatant flim flam. It's an insult to our intelligence. The fact that the two men, I mean, like we've negotiated, you know, having people removed from other countries, you know, spies from Russia or China, you know, we've had here are the two heads of state. Obviously they could negotiate the return of this one man, and they're playing 3-card Monte. Because remember, he grew up in Queens. Okay. You know, the swindles aren't that complicated. Okay. And they're kind of in plain sight. And that's what we just saw. A wink, wink, not at all. I don't know. It just fell off the truck. Well, I didn't see it. You know, but we all know you stole it. So it's just a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah. And also he's so powerful that he can end the war with Ukraine in one day, but he can't get this man back. I mean, it is just so ridiculous. But I wanted to say just one more thing about the denial. Do you remember the Hitler diary scandal in 1983? Okay, so for those who don't remember, it was a huge international scandal. Some like 2-penny forger forged a bunch of diaries by Hitler. And everybody got very excited because it was a scoop, you know, it was a journalism scoop. And Stern, which was the West German magazine, and also the Sunday Times of London paid the equivalent of 3.7 million for those diaries that were obvious frauds. But so why did everyone believe it? Well, of course, they wanted to believe it because it was a great scoop. But also, I looked at those diaries, and in those diaries, the interesting thing is that in the story, the diaries tell, Hitler never mentions the concentration camps. The diary, it was as if he didn't know about them. So the diaries expose this wish that Hitler was not personally responsible, which is, something you see in Holocaust denial over and over, right? And Ron Rosenbaum, who wrote Explaining Hitler, a great book, wrote that these people seem to believe that the Holocaust was some kind of spontaneous combustion born of bureaucratic exigency from below without the complicity of Himmler or Heydrich or Hitler. And so that's what I saw in the Oval Office. Like, this was just spontaneously happened. No one did it, you know.
Right.
So
it was a dance where no one was responsible. Yeah.
The other thing that happened in this past week that I think is in the same vein, and that is on last Friday, the Department of Homeland Security told the Social Security Administration to enter more than 6,000 names of immigrants as dead into its database. They're going to declare 6,000 immigrants who paid into Social Security. They're going to declare them dead so that they don't have to. So this would starve the immigrants, basically. It cuts off their ability to work legally in the country, to receive various government benefits, to access financial services like credit cards and bank accounts. And so this is so obviously reminiscent of the Nuremberg laws, where you strip one by one the rights, and you treat living people as if they're already dead. And so when you start treating live human beings as dead, you're on the road to seeing that through. And so lastly, on this point, I just want to quote this great Holocaust scholar named Raoul Hilberg, who wrote The Destruction of the European Jews. One of my favorite books. It's a great book. Raoul Hilberg says the Germans said three things to the Jews in sequence. The first one was, "You may not live among us as Jews." The second one was, "You may not live among us." And the third one was, "You may not live." And that is a road that we are going down.
Yeah. Well, people are going to die in these El Salvadorian prisons where they're being sent, for life. One of the reasons I really wanted to have you on is when we talked to you, like maybe it was the second time, you were talking about the timeline. You educated us as to the timeline of the collapse of democratic institutions after Hitler's inauguration. And we were arguing about how fast we would see that collapse in America, if we would see it at all. I was arguing for the more hysterical option, that this was going to happen rapidly, that it looked like this was a blitzkrieg. And Harry was being more reasonable and balanced and saying we have to see, there's going to be resistance, there's the courts, there's unions, and so the truth is neither of us actually knew. None of us knew, right? We were all just trying to put get our sense of what was going to happen. And now it feels like, unfortunately, the most dire prediction is the one that's the closest to accurate, because in 3 months, so many democratic institutions have collapsed. And I just wondered, since you really know the timeline and you know these institutions, and you know these dominoes, I was just wondering what you've been noticing over these last 3 months.
Okay, so Trump is doing exactly what Hitler did in destroying the institutions that you need to destroy: the universities, the courts. They'll get to the press probably, and doing it very fast and very effectively, as fast as Hitler did. But there is a difference that is maybe hopeful, and that is that compliance among the German population happened really, really quickly. And there is still a very live flame, of opposition happening. And I think part of it is, Harry always brings up the point that we're so much bigger a country, and that, so, it's so many more people. Let's see, we're 340 million, and Germany in 33 was 125 million. So we're like almost 3 times, between 2 and 3 times bigger. At this point in Hitler's reign, the newspapers were already shut down. When I see like Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel or those late night talk show hosts, comedians are truth tellers, and they are talking about what's happening with surgical precision and so smart about what's happening and clear-eyed, and as are our best commentators and historians and doctors, that was not happening anymore in Germany. Like that had been shut down. So I do really see hope there. But what happens when he sends the first journalist to El Salvador? What happens when people actually have to give up something to keep talking? Because right now, the late night comedians, they get paid for truth telling. Everybody, they're still getting rewarded for this, right? And when it comes time to give up your income, I think people will fold like they always do. but that hasn't happened yet. So maybe we can, in this time that we have before that happens.
Right. Well, one of the points is that all of these media corporations that are putting on these comedians are corporations. And we said that Trump rules by extortion, and he has succeeded actually in bringing a lot of these news organizations to heel. That ABC and CBS having a settlement with them. To donate to his presidential library, which I guess is the secret files in the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, the lending library.
Dear God.
But the problem is, these media companies are owned by larger corporate entities that are responsible to their shareholders to maximize profits. And so if having Jimmy Kimmel on, let's say that Trump, gets to them, right? He says now he's moved on to phase 3 or whatever, right? And he's saying to the network that has Jimmy Kimmel on, nice, multi-billion-dollar corporation you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it, like suddenly we just signed an executive order that just basically made your whole company illegal.
Right.
Do you love Jimmy Kimmel that much? Do you love him that much?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And Trump is, he's acting like all dictators before him. He's purging the civil service and putting loyalists in place, of course. And they're dismantling everything, but he believes that he can just override the law, and that if he does, it's like what Nixon said: if the president does it, it's not illegal, and laws are dispensed with, and scruples are abandoned, and and in Germany, compliance to that came very, very fast. There's still hope for us, there's still.
Thank you. I think you're right. I mean, obviously I'm terrified, and I'm really watching very carefully, but I'm seeing a lot of pushback. I'm seeing pushback on the ground. You're right, John. I mean, if MSNBC decides to pull its programming, but I don't see that happening. I think these institutions are pretty strong. The networks have not caved. They've caved on a lawsuit or two. Even Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post has not interfered with the reporting. The reporting is still
right. Just the editorial page.
Right. But the editorial page was controlled by Phil Graham and then Catherine Graham 40 years ago. That's often the case, that the owner controls the editorial page. I'm not defending Bezos. I think he's horrible, but I'm not seeing the media collapse. If anything, I'm seeing the media making a lot of money from the attention it's getting. MSNBC had doubled its viewership during the Trump administration. So there's more institutional resistance. And then there's two more things. Laurie, tell me what you think. First of all, these guys are morons. They're doing really stupid things. I mean, crashing Social Security. You know what's going to happen if those folks don't get their checks in America? They don't call it the third rail of American politics for nothing. Even this whole thing, they're forcing a constitutional crisis in this way. If they were savvy, they would just push and push and push, but then give in and push. But no, Trump thinks anything he thinks is right. So I think they're morons and making terrible mistakes. So
they are morons. I mean, Lutnick. I mean, you're speechless watching these guys. I was going to say that people who run the major Holocaust memorial sites around the world have been, for a long time, have been thinking, what's going to happen when there are no more survivors? And, the oldest survivor just died this year. She was like 113. The last baby born in a concentration camp was born at the end of April 45. That person is 80 years old and doesn't really remember. So we are in the age of living memory is gone. And the Holocaust is like a balloon, and we're holding onto the string. We can't see the balloon anymore. And we're just, so what is this going to mean? I mean, administrators at Holocaust sites, they know that a lot of the sites are going to close. Not Auschwitz, but other sites will close. But the maybe. But the other thing is that sorry, I lost my train of thought. We're so far away from the Holocaust. What is the world going to be like? Well, it turns out it's dumber than anyone could have anticipated, right? Like you were saying, when I saw Elon Musk, get up with a chainsaw and hold it, and what does he say? He says, chainsaw. I mean, it's like, what? That is what you have to say? I mean, that's how moronic it is. It's unbelievable. And then the other hopeful thing is Trump's laziness, because if he were really organized, or if one of the Stevens, like Steve Bannon or Steve Miller, had organized it better, January 6th would have been far worse, right? They would have taken over the Capitol. They would have stopped the vote, but they didn't, because Trump is so lazy, and he puts it out there, but he doesn't really follow through, and he's let the cards fall where they might,
Exactly.
Whereas the Nazis, they had the violence before the election, the violence after the election, targeted violence, terrifying violence. Trump's not doing that because he doesn't want to get in trouble. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty. His violence, like what he's doing to Abrasio Garcia in El Salvador, I mean, that is people don't even know if that guy's alive anymore. I mean,
I don't think he is.
Because
I don't. I think that everyone dies in that place, and now they're stuck because they can't bring him back.
Right. Well, maybe that's why they can't bring him back.
Exactly. That's my thought.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's terrifying. But Trump is really, really lazy, and that's why all of his executive orders and the chainsaw cuts to the government and the tariffs, they're also haphazard and not planned very well. And it's just like a child.
Right.
I mean, it's just
And that's his psychology. It's just chaotic, impulsive, inconsistent, a combination of his impulsive temperament and his dementia. So that's part of what's making it so destructive, because it's creating such chaos around the world.
But John, it's also our hope. Because if he were doing this systematically, if he were doing this with real planning, we'd be in far worse trouble. And we're already in terrible trouble, but we'd be more like Nazi Germany, wouldn't we, Laurie?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so one thing Hitler was ready to do right away when he came into power was every association, the Women's Association, the Sports Association, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, they were all Nazified immediately, so that they started to direct the energy of the young people toward military, toward training and military stuff, and all of that energy that they had, and anger that they had whipped up, they focused it. Everybody had to attend. You had to join these clubs, one of these clubs, whoever you were in the society. Trump doesn't have the ability to organize something like that, and so a lot of it is just getting dispersed. Yeah, it's just they're not that good at what they're doing.
Thankfully,
in a way.
We called them the gang that couldn't coup straight. But Laurie, I know you were a former book reviewer, and so I appreciate your. Didn't you review books or?
Well, I reviewed theater, but
theater.
Sure, I reviewed books.
The theater. I'm sorry. Great. But in other words,
No.
you have a sensitivity to language, and to the sophistication of language and nuance, and from Shakespeare to the great playwrights. And so I'm glad you bring up just the butchering of the language and the kind of flat, primitive nature of the thinking that really is reflected in the sentence structure, right? I mean, chainsaw, that is so caveman like, and these are the people who are like guiding the policy of our government. I think the linguistic part is important.
Definitely. And because we're a society that has become more and more worshipful of wealth and less respectful of intellectual prowess.
Good point.
is the level of the discourse is astoundingly low. And as you pointed out, Trump's vocabulary is like 35 words. I mean, he always saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Nothing ever happened like this before. And it's astounding. And that is potentially hopeful. I have a question for doctors. The phenomenon of dictators projecting, saying that, confessing through what they say their opponent is doing, like,
projecting.
I find that so interesting. And I wonder, like, is it because, Trump, that's what Trump would do, so he believes that everyone else acts the same way? Or is it like you have to prop up your enemy's evilness so that you can perform your own, mendacity? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I find that projection.
I think it's both.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because at a psychological level, he truly is projecting. It really is something that happens without his conscious attempt to make it happen. It's his primitive psychology, but it's also an effective strategy to keep accusing the other person, the other side, of what you are doing. It distracts from your wrongdoing, and it actually then justifies, which was your point, it justifies you're doing something aggressive to fight back against this alleged misdeed that they didn't do that you actually did.
And I also think it speaks, and this is where, I mean, Trump is, I agree with you that he's lazy and he's limited and he's moronic. But, John Heilman always says that when Trump speaks, it's projection or confession. Mm-hmm. And when he does that, when he vilifies the other and he talks about them, he has an unerring way of reaching his base. Like, they feel it. It makes sense to them. Mm-hmm. So that's where the power is, even though he can't follow through on it very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did just want to get back to one thing you guys talked about, because it's something really important that I disagree with you about. I think there's some sense that Trump's erratic, unpredictable, dysfunctional, that somehow that's going to be work to our benefit because he's so disorganized, right? He can't sort of do something in a coherent and organized way. Instead, it's impulsive and erratic and changeable. But I want to bring you back to an old saying from the Middle Ages. A bad king is better than no king, and no king is better than a child king. The problem is that chaos has its own type of destruction. It would almost rather have a competent president, right, executing an evil policy in some ways than to have this sort of chaos, because the reason people are fleeing American treasury bonds in droves, and ultimately that will be the thing that brings down the American economy. And they're doing it for two reasons. One, because they hate Donald Trump, but two, because we're starting to look erratic and unpredictable and like a third world country. And maybe we're not such a good bet. And if there's chaos, that means a lot of other countries are going to be up to no good because, hey, there's nobody minding the store. So I can do that. All I'm saying is we should be very afraid of chaos. I think it's truly something for us to fear nationally and internationally. It's not something to joke about. And I don't think it's working in our favor. I think actually we want to maintain the coherence of the world, right? Because what's happening is all of the structures are collapsing. All right. So chaos is not, I would argue that chaos is not our friend right now.
Well, I think that if I may speak for Harry and myself, I think we were talking about his ineptitude more than the chaos. And that's really another really dangerous thing about chaos is that it's exciting. I see this with my sister. Like, the world is being turned upside down. It's so exciting because life is kind of boring when everything's going along as it's supposed to. Yeah. And something's really happening now, something historic. And we're recreating the system. Wow. And it's so alive,
What an amazing reframe.
Well, in fact, what I would add, Laurie, for me, one of the key elements of human development in childhood and in art is suspense. suspense is
right.
It's so important. You can't do anything without it. And Trump has that talent with his chaos to keep everybody revved up.
And if it's exciting, right? When we're literally watching Rome burn, and they're like, what's that song? Everybody light the fire. And they're like dancing around the fire. You know what I mean? Like, and we're going, oh my God, oh my God.
Well, I would rather have chaos than an evil king, first of all, because that would be Hitler or Stalin, who were very effective. And I'm hoping that the chaos will create a backlash. I want to see a midterm election where they get trounced and then everything Trump tries to do gets stopped by Congress. They take away his tariffs. They support lawsuits. There's a lot that could happen if the chaos forces the other side to mobilize. And that's, I mean, I'm not saying it's how I'd like to do it, but that's one way we might come back. Maybe.
I wouldn't be heartbroken if he ended up like Mussolini, frankly. I think that might be a fitting ending, hanging upside down by his feet. But we are watching a coup. We're watching a coup happen. That's what's happening.
We're watching a coup. I know.
That's what we're watching.
And it began on January 6th, 2021.
Yeah, that's right. That was the beer hall putsch. That was the beer hall putsch. It really followed the playbook, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
Well, Laurie, it's so as always, we really do specialize in dark humor here. So we always have such a good time talking about the absolute worst things.
Yeah. Well, you know, I got in trouble one time because I was having dinner with a friend of a friend, and I said, you know, I was telling you, what are you working on? And I said, you know, I love Hitler, and he was like, don't you ever? That's not cute. Don't ever say that. And, you know, like I said, it's okay. I'm Jewish. He's like, and he wasn't Jewish, and he's like, you may never say, you know. And then he called for the check. We were having a drink anyway. So yeah, sometimes you have to be careful with the black humor, but I do think it's very valuable, and I always laugh when I listen to you guys. And I have to give you one compliment, is that I think that you do a very interesting model of male friendship. I think it's like it's just like a really good, like you know each other's foibles and you give each other room and you enjoy it. Sometimes you might get a tiny bit irritated, but you know, and it's just a great model.
Thank you.
Thanks.
A lot of men aren't great at friendship. You know, that's too
sweet.
Simple. But anyway,
that's half the reason we're still doing the show.
Yeah, I can tell how much you enjoy each other.
And Laurie, if you say I love Hitler, we won't call for the check.
Okay.
Well, no,
that's all I ask. That's all I ask.
But we might put it to music. We might put it to music and do something.
Please do. Oh, please. Yes, I'd be very happy. For Hitler in Germany.
My favorite.
Winter for Poland and France. Okay.
Laurie,
I didn't remember that lyric.
So it's great to see you both. I'll be listening every week.
All
Thank
right.
you for your
We'll
work.
have you back on again at some further point in civilization's decline.
Thanks, Laurie.
Good luck.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Well,
Bon chance.
thank you.
Bon chance.
Merci. Oh,
that was wonderful. She is so great. We love her. We love her. And it is nice to have someone else that we can share our Jewish black humor with. Well, Harry, we've reached the shrink wrap portion of our show. What have we learned today?
Oh, what a question. You know, each time you ask me, I try to think of the week. Like what's the most salient thing? What really sort of comes to mind? And like last time, maybe even more, it's emergency.
Yeah.
It's emergency. Yeah. It's like a siren. And that doesn't mean that I'm running around screaming and putting out a fire, but it means that I'm taking this really seriously. And we have to, because we're watching him do all these things. I was reassured to a small degree by Laurie's talking of Trump's incompetence and his laziness, just as I was encouraged by Joe Walsh, who really was making a very similar point, which is Trump may bring us to such a brink that we can rediscover stability, and the reaction to him will be could really be stabilizing. And I really believe that if Trump crashes the economy and the world order, which he's doing, and he's pushed back by courts and starts doing even more reckless things and starts melting down on television and being kind of psychotic, which he kind of is already, I do foresee the possibility of a devastating midterm where Democrats control both houses and stop him in his tracks, which they could do. They could take away his tariffs. They could take away his executive orders. They could investigate him. There's so much they could do. I wish I could say that's going to happen, because I don't know.
Well, it just feels so long away.
I wish I could say that things will be okay. I can't. And so we're left once again with the thing I say every week, which is be vigilant, devote a certain amount of time every day, every week to being current. Don't put your head in the sand. Okay. And be someone who passes things around. If you find this show helpful, send the link. If you find other articles or other people who are commentators, send them around. Be part of a network of people who are thinking about this, but don't forget to enjoy the things in life that you love, your partner, your family, your children, your friends, your neighborhood, the world. Try not to forget that. It doesn't help if you exhaust yourself over this. It doesn't. You have to stay balanced. You have to stay even healthier to fight what is likely to come.
Right. Well, I think emergency is a good word. I do keep coming back to that joke my mom used to tell. Somebody was depressed and her friend said, "Hey, cheer up, things could be worse." And sure enough, they got worse. It seems like every week we're having to report on the fact that things have gotten worse. And people who know and people who are not hysterical are saying we are in a constitutional crisis now. It's happening now. It's not a warning. It's not a foreboding. It's reality. And I'm afraid it is going to get worse. And to be honest, they're really good at it. That whole 3-card Monty thing, with it. Of course it's bullshit. Of course it's a lie. But they've learned they can get away with bullshit and lies. In other words, so they can evade the court order. They can reframe it. Oh, this isn't that. This is something else. This is his executive authority to conduct foreign policy. And so we're in a battle now with the courts. And I'm not trying to say it's a foregone conclusion. It's like we really are watching each round like a prize fight. You know what I mean?
But listen, it hasn't been 90 days. You're seeing thousands of demonstrations every week. You're seeing some brave universities fighting back. You're seeing Bernie. You're seeing Chris Van Holland. It's not an empty response.
No.
And it's not even 90 days. Imagine what happens with this resistance in another 90 days. So that's the positive spin.
And really what happened with Harvard, a lot of people are saying, and I'm not quite calling it a turning point, but that it was momentous. It was the first time when the institutions pulled together and said no. So I don't want to belittle that. And I don't, like you said, we need to have hope. And part of our hope is viva la resistance, and the resistance is vivaing.
Yes.
So, well, you're the one who knows how to speak French. But
sometimes you're less eloquent than others, John, just to be honest.
Wasn't one of my best lines, but hey, they can't all be home runs, Harry.
Exactly. Exactly. Some aren't even singles, but keep going.
but viva la resistance. I mean, congratulations to the people that are doing it. And the point is, it does make a difference. And I think
it does. And one builds on the other. 87 days, man. This is not a done deal, even though it's really bad, but it's not a done deal. It's
right.
not a done deal. It's not
right,
a done deal.
Right. No, both can be true. It's not a done deal. It's really bad. True.
There you go. That's the show.
There you go,
That's
folks.
our message. Well, as some of you know, and John certainly does, I've been in Paris for the last 3 months. I actually left on the day that Trump was inaugurated, thinking that Kamala would be inaugurated, sadly. But I've been here for 3 months and studying French at a wonderful little French school. But I got to know some other clinicians, and it turns out there were 2 guys who have a podcast called Les Analyses de Macron, and that it's basically like shrinking Trump, but they're shrinking Macron, and they said that last night they got a hold of a audio recording of a telephone call that Trump made to Macron last night, and they said I needed to hear it, and they said that it was for me only, but I don't want to I don't want to keep it to myself. So I thought we would just throw it on the deck, and we could all hear it together for the first time.
So this just came over the transom. We just received this. Neither of us have listened to this. We're all going to be listening to it for the first time right here, right now, live on Shrinking Trump.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's play it.
Hey, little Manny. Did I wake you? It's Big Donald here.
What? It's 3 a.m., Donald.
Yeah, lucky for you. Lucky for you. I have a minute to talk in between destroying institutions. You're welcome. Don't mention it.
What?
You know, I was just thinking about that day you were with me in the Oval Office saying all those nice things about me. You even touched my leg. Meanwhile, when you weren't looking, I was grabbing your cute wife's ass because you know why? You know why, Manny? Because when you're a mad dictator with nuclear weapons, they let you do it.
Well, don't remind me. You were ridiculous.
I know, women find me irresistible. What can I say?
Not exactly. It means disgusting.
And my brain, my MIT brain, and you said I was smart that day in the Oval Office. That was the smartest thing you ever said.
Oh, oui, I said tu es bercé trop près du mur. That means you were rocked too close to the wall when you were a baby.
Yeah, that's smart, huh?
Oh, yeah, real chien. That's French for moron.
So look, little Manny. All I want to do is this. I just want to find one Jewish psychologist, which is one more than we have, because he's in your country. Give me a break. I only need this one psychologist, Manny.
What is his name?
Segal. Harry Segal. He's part of the vicious, disgusting, shrinking Trump gang. You can spot them by their lack of tattoos or identifying marks. They're terrorists, Manny. Really, really, really bad guys. They're raping the cats and eating the dogs in the streets of Ohio. They're hitting 90-year-old women over the head with psychoanalytic interpretations. They're bad people.
Wait, Harry Segal? Mon Dieu, he's my shrink. Donald, tu es vraiment naze.
Oh, I do have a beautiful schnoz. Everyone says so. Wait, Segal is your shrink?
No, it's a naze. Donald, you can't have this psychologue. I need him to cope with you.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Because I just signed an executive order urging the prosecution of the shrinking Trump gang leaders Harry Segal and John Gartner. And when your precious therapist gets to the airport, we're going to put him in a special cold room, stripped naked, with no food or blanket. And that's when the fun really begins. He'll be in chains in El Salvador faster than you can say loudmouth Jew. Those are the worst kind. I know you agree with me. And when we get a hold of that Gartner guy, it's going to be a whole lot worse. They're going to be crying for their mamas real soon. Oh, Donald, you may show me the bread. Well, this was a perfect call.
Mama, holy fuck, we're screwed. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?
John, we just calm down. We're gonna figure something out.
All right, Harry, we got to get you out of there.
Yep.
I can't get you because they're going to be looking for me at the airports. We should send an extraction team, but oh wait, we don't have an extraction team. We actually don't have any kind of team. Okay, this mission is impossible.
Maybe it's time to call in our top undercover man. He looks so ordinary, he could be anybody. The man of 1,000 disguises. I'm not talking about Brooklyn Dad. I'm talking about Rex.
Rex, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to extract Harry from France. First, you must dress up like priests because they're looking for a Jew at the border and they'll never suspect it. Second, when you bring him on the plane from America, you have to pretend to be a MAGA making a citizen's ICE arrest, and Harry will pose as your prisoner. But remember, should you be caught or killed, Sprinkling Trump will deny all knowledge of your mission. Good luck, Rex. Well, Harry, you're going to make it. You're going to make it, Harry. I know you're going to make it. It's going to be an impossible mission, but we're going to do it. Boom, 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 doo-doo, 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 boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom,
Where's
boom,
Napoleon
boom,
Solo when
boom,
you need
boom,
him?
Boom, 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 boom.
Hope to see you next week, folks.
Ta-da!
Here on Shrinking Trump.
We hope.